Welcome to the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
Welcome back in, listeners, to the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking everything college hoops. You could have been anywhere else in the dial. Chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus, and we appreciate that. We're going to try to help you through the withdrawal with no Final Four, no baseball opening day. And the way that we're going to try to continue to fill that sports void is to just keep talking about great college basketball teams. And we have arguably one of those teams that might find its way into a Final Four if that opportunity exists this season, San Diego State. That's right, the Aztecs. We brought in Mark Zeigler from the San Diego Union-Tribune. Please check out his work at SanDiegoUnionTribune.com. And please give him a follow at SDUTZEIGER, all lowercase, on Twitter. Mark and I were lucky enough to discuss one of the best players in the nation, Malachi Flynn. Mark outlined perfectly his pathway to greatness this season. We were also able to chat San Diego sports on the whole, which I thought was a fascinating part of the conversation. We talked the success Coach Brian Dutcher and what he's done with his coaching staff with player development with players like Yanni Wetzel and Matt Mitchell. Also discussing the possibilities of the basketball IQ that could carry this particular squad to a Final Four. We really hope you like what you're listening to here on the Screener College Basketball Podcast. If you do, please give us a follow on Twitter at SDS Podcast. Efficiency of keystrokes, of course. Please don't forget to give Mike a follow over at Randall Rant. Say nice things about Mark. Say nice things about Mike and what we're trying to provide for you here on the podcast. And if you really like what you're listening to, don't forget to give the podcast a kind review on your podcast consumption vehicle of choice. Say nice things about some of the guests. Say nice things about the production that Mike is putting together, or maybe just say some nice things about college basketball in general. Doesn't even have to do with us. Be selfless. Let's get to that conversation with Mark. Please give him a follow at SDUTZEIGER, and please give his things a follow over at SanDiegoUnionTribune.com. Cheers, everybody. Please stay safe. Catch up with you before you know it. All right, listeners, welcome back into the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking college hoops, even right now when there's no hoops games to talk of. And what we're trying to do is kind of give you a season recap. And one of the greatest seasons that we had was with the San Diego State Aztecs. And we brought in Mark Zeigler to talk about some Aztec basketball. Mark, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. How are things out west?
Well, we're getting by, but like you said, there's no college basketball right now. And it's kind of a weird week with the Final Four. Wouldn't normally be looming. And on Thursday to fly to Atlanta and just kind of eerie and different. Different
is a good adjective to describe that. You know, out here on the East Coast, we're experiencing a little different as well. So I think there's a little different everywhere. So I'm glad we're able to provide a sliver of normalcy with this little conversation about college hoops. So hopefully listeners appreciate that. One of the things that kind of blew my mind when I just took a look at the pure numbers is the 30-2 record. That's something else. That's like Gonzaga, Liberty type success. You guys were the final undefeated team in the nation. You had a number 2-ish seed awaiting for the big dance. Is this season going to be celebrated on par with that, you know, Sweet 16 Kawhi team, or is there something that will linger unknown for Aztec fans?
Right now, I think it's the latter. I think it's just kind of lingering. The thing you have to understand about San Diego is we don't have a long history of sports success in the major sports. We had an indoor soccer team that won a bunch of championships. The Padres have not won in forever. The Chargers left town. San Diego State football has been very good, but in football, it's different for a quote unquote mid-major. There's definitely a glass ceiling in terms of who you play and where you play in a bowl game. And in basketball, that doesn't exist. And the basketball team's sort of the one team that's, sports team in San Diego has been able to break through that. And so a lot of the city's kind of emotional capital in terms of sports is spent on this team. And a lot of the identity of the city is attached to this team. And so when it ends this abruptly with so much anticipation for the NCAA tournament and a chance to sort of validate that 30-2 record, it hurt a lot of people. And you hear it all the time. I see it on Twitter. I see it, I can hear it in the voices of the people I talk to. I did a story with a couple of the players, the two of the senior players who had transferred in, grad transfers, KJ Fagan and Yanni Wetzel. A few days after the cancellation, they didn't even want to talk the first few days. And then they finally agreed to talk. And I didn't even have to listen to their words. I could just hear the way they were speaking. Their voices were so low. And it was just such an abrupt end of the season. And I know it was painful for all players and all fans across the country, but I think it was a little bit more poignant and hurtful here just because of the anticipation expectation. So to kind of answer your question, I would say that maybe in a few years it will be remembered on par with that team. But I kind of feel like people felt like it had to get to a Sweet 16 or further to really sort of cement its place in history. And because it was unable to do that, and through no fault of its own, it's just going to sort of be that asterisk season that's just sort of hanging out there.
Seems like a couple of other programs might actually fall into that category. I think you can include Dayton as far as that goes with their magical season they had out here a little bit on the East Coast. And I agree that the lingering effect is just, it's going to be unfinished business, and you'll just a huge question mark and uncertainty. But one of the things that was very certain with your program this year, and one of the things that we talk about all the time when we're talking Final Four or March Madness, is guards win games. And you had one of the finest guards in the nation, Malachi Flynn. His assist-to-turnover ratio operated like an Amante Morris type atmosphere all season. He led the nation in win shares with 7.4, a number that is higher than both like Obi Toppin and Peyton Pritchard. Can you inform the listeners just how great Flynn was this entire season on and off the court for the Aztecs?
So he was a transfer from Washington State, came after his sophomore year, and he kind of followed a similar path as Xavier Thames a few years earlier. And Xavier Thames was also point guard at Washington State. A little bit different situation. Didn't play as much his freshman year as he wanted to, and left. And came to San Diego State and played 3 years, and it was the Mount West Player of the Year, and led San Diego State team to Sweet 16, in 2013-14, 3 years after Kawhi Leonard did it. And probably had maybe, one of the best careers or the best career in San Diego State history when you look at his 3 years. Malachi Flynn, came after his sophomore year, but it was very similar in that regard. Became a Mount West Player of the Year, but had to sit out that season and improve his game. And I have the luxury of being able to go to practices. And so for that entire year last year, I watched this guy in practice and just said, this guy is going to be so good. And the same thing with Xavier Thames. They're different players in that Xavier's a little bit taller, a better defender, on-ball defender. Malachi's probably a little bit better, a deeper range on his shot, a little bit more offensively inclined. Both have this very similar impact in just running the team and just kind of a calming influence on the team. And just, you know what, I got you. We need a big bucket. I got that. And I need a big steal. I got that. Probably his two kind of, or maybe three shining moments were in the final of the Las Vegas Invitational against Iowa. He had 28 in the second half alone and just buried Iowa after Iowa led by 16 in the first half. And then a couple of weeks later, they played their first conference game, San Jose State, or second conference game, first at home, against San Jose State. He's a perennial doormat. They played horrible. And he had a fall-away three-pointer over three guys at the buzzer to win that. And then in the final regular season game of the year, he had 36 at Nevada and carried them to a very, very impressive win. After they kind of struggled a little bit a couple weeks before and kind of the wheels were starting to wobble a little bit. And it was a message that, okay, like you said, guards win games in March. We're headed to March now and we're ready to go. And it was a very, very impressive show by him.
Especially with your pace of play with the Aztecs, if you have a big shot maker like Flynn that can close out a game that's going to be tightly contested due to the number of possessions each team possesses, that's a huge advantage. And we saw that be, Peyton Pritchard with Oregon, I guess, with his late shot making ability, Jaron Crutcher from Dayton with his late shot making. It just seemed like Malachi had a number of those moments, and you outlined those just perfectly. Oh, I bet that scout team was absolutely nasty during his sit out year. He must have been.
His first action with the Aztecs was an intra-squad scrimmage. And they had him with they had 5 freshmen that year. So they put the 5 freshmen and Malachi in one team, and they played all the veterans. And he was guarded by a guy named Jeremy Hemsley, who was a senior, really good defender, 6'4", athletic, tough. And I thought was the best perimeter defender in the conference that year. Shut down everybody he played against. So he guards Malachi. Malachi goes nuts on him. It has like 30 in this game, including a half-court runner at the buzzer to send the inter-squad scrimmage into overtime, which they won. Yeah, that was kind of just a little signal of this is what it's going to be like in practice all year. And, it was also frustrating because they struggled that season and had a really tough season. Didn't play in any postseason tournament, which at San Diego State now with its elevated standards and expectations is a bad season, even though they won 21 games. But there was a lot of frustration because people knew how good Malachi was and just not being able to have him. out there was hard for people to know what they had, but couldn't show anybody else.
You know what? I also, when you're talking about that particular situation, it reminds me of the success that, San Diego State, and we can include Gonzaga in this category as well, that some of these programs have with this red shirt sit out year, and just the improvement that the players show when they come back. It seems like you guys might have something cooking there as far as the red shirt season goes, and the player development that you have there. The coaching staff must be doing an unbelievable job.
They have a long history of that, and that's kind of how Steve Fisher built the program. He started with a guy named Randy Holcomb, who I believe played right away, but then Tony Bland came from Syracuse. He was an LA kid, came home, but sat out a year. Lorenzo Wade came from Louisville. J.J. O'Brien came from Utah, was a very, very good player for them. Dwayne Poley from St. John's turned out to be a very good player. And yes, they have a great player development system. And I just think it was interesting because when the whole issue came up about the transfer rule changing, and the first person I went to was Malachi. He's not one of many words. He's a pretty quiet, reserved kid. But when I asked him about, what do you think about this, proposed rule change and not having to sit out, he all of a sudden sort of lit up and started talking and said, I get it. It helps the players and I'm all for it. And it's a case by case situation. He goes, but don't underestimate the value of sitting out. And just from a maturity standpoint, he was already really good and he had shown that at Washington State. And he could have stepped in and had probably almost as good a season last year. But I think the idea of being on campus, taking a breath, slowing down, being able to focus on certain parts of your game without having to worry about a scout every single day and another opponent coming up and the pressures of the game and then coming down from that. Just being able to be even keeled and sort of meld into the background of your campus and become part of that community first. I think it really helps. And you just see the maturity in players. And that's my one sort of fear about this transfer rule. I get it. I see what they're going with, but boy, I just think it really benefits the players and from all standpoints, both academically and athletically.
I totally agree with you. And if you look at the profile of a couple of the programs that we talked about, you see the improvement. We can talk about somebody that was in your conference and then transferred to Gonzaga, Brandon Clark, how improvement he showed. And he went from not being on any draft board anywhere to getting drafted in the first round and then being one of the best rookies inside the NBA this past season that was cut short. So you can see the value, the tangible value of sitting out that year, especially with a coaching staff that has such excellent player development like your own and like Gonzaga's. And, you mentioned Helmsley. I totally remember him. One of the, every season that occurs, like your season that you had, needs a lifer or a vet that's been there forever. And your guy that knows the drill is Matt Mitchell. The 6'6" junior played major minutes from game one as a freshman. I feel like he has a little Chris Jenkins to his game from Villanova. How impactful was Mitchell, especially during the second half of the season when he kind of got his groove on and started going bananas?
The thing with him was he started his first 2 years and had a 30-point game as a freshman. And like you said, it was just a regular fixture in the lineup. Two things happened. The first thing was he was really overweight and he just kept getting bigger and bigger. He's listed 6'6". He's probably 6'5", maybe 6'5.5". But he weighed in the 260s, if you can believe that. And there was a point where they almost made him to a Barkley-esque four-man. He just made the decision himself over the summer. I've got to lose the weight. I've finally got to do it, and it's one of those things when a player's career starts to near the end, they can see the sands going through the hourglass and not much sand left. They start to get a little bit more serious about their fitness. And he lost the weight. He got it down in the 240s, and it was a huge difference for him. Right a few weeks before preseason practice started, he had a minor knee issue and had minor surgery and was out for about 3 or 4 weeks. And what happened there was by the time he came back, the lineup was kind of already set, and he was the sixth man. And so you had Nathan Mensah, the big, rim protecting center. You had Yanni Wetzel at the 4, the transfer from Vanderbilt. You had KJ Fagan and Malachi Flynn as the guards. Then you had a guy named Jordan Shackle, also a junior, also from the Southern California, who had kind of supplanted him in the starting lineup. And they just said, let's just go with it. Matt's, a little bit behind. We'll bring him off the bench. Well, he was such a great bench player. They started winning. They didn't want to change anything. He even said, don't change anything. And it wasn't until Nathan Mensah had a pulmonary embolism in midseason in the last game of December and was gone basically for the rest of the year that they moved Matt back into the starting lineup. And then you really got to see, he was able to play heavier minutes because of his fitness. And he just started to play himself into big games on both ends of the floor. I mean, he had a 5-steal game, which was unheard of at his weight the season before. He had assists, he had rebounds, he hit threes, he was able to get inside and get his body on people and finish, made free throws. So he became he guarded with a new enthusiasm just because he could. He could get to spots, he could close out, not get blown by on the closeout. And so, he was a difference maker. He did not have a good conference tournament, and it was going to be interesting to me to see in the NCAA tournament. One of the things I was really focused on is to see how he bounced back from that conference tournament.
One of those guessing games that you just don't know. Want to have those student athletes afforded that opportunity that the NCAA tournament would provide in it, and that was robbed for players like Mitchell and players across the country. One of the players that you mentioned on the little rundown there was Yanni Wetzel, the big man, who does everything right this past season. He shot it efficiently, defended the post well, rebounded the ball really well. His only limiter was foul trouble. I guess the question is, how much of a surprise were his results, and how much of his results benefited from just simple opportunity and playing time?
I think the only 4 people in the country who were not surprised, or maybe 5, were him, because I think he always had confidence in himself, and the coaching staff. So what happened with him was, he's from New Zealand. He was a youth world-ranked junior tennis player, had a world ranking, was very, very good, but just kept growing and growing and growing. He almost got too big for tennis, and also just kind of felt like he had a personality for team sports. So in his high school, they had a basketball team. He made it, and he started playing basketball senior year of high school and made a youth national camp in New Zealand. And, his dream was always to play Division I tennis for an NCAA school, but he decided he wanted to play basketball, so he helped get a recruiting service. And really the only school that really had any interest and said, wow, he's got some pretty good footwork there from tennis was St. Mary's in San Antonio, a D2 school. So he went there 2 years, transferred, sat out a year, Vandy, and then played a year, that disastrous season, Bryce Drew and 0-18 in the SEC. And then the whole thing falls apart, and he decides, I'm going to grad transfer. And there's a connection with one of the members of San Diego State staff, and he also had an aunt who lived in the San Diego County, so he was familiar with the area. And so he came down to San Diego State and Texas Tech, and it tells you Chris Beard saw the same things that the San Diego State coaches did in terms of footwork, shooting range, post moves, size, strength. He's a solid 6'10", built guy, attitude, maturity, all those things. And he chose San Diego State, and the coaches kept saying he's going to be really good for us. And he really was. He struggled a little bit early, just getting adjusted. And then when Nathan Mensah got hurt, he had to go from the 4 to the 5. He's really much more of a 4-man. That's kind of what they brought him into play, what he wanted to play. But he kind of had to play more of a 5, guard 5, and he just made an incredible adjustment. Like you mentioned, a little bit of issue with foul trouble, but not too much. But that was more of a product of his positioning and who he was guarding. But he really became a difference maker in some games. I mean, a lot of double-doubles, really, really good post player. Teams, who didn't double him got crushed. And then when they did double him, he was smart enough to pass, and they had all those shooters in the perimeter. They could put 4 guys on the floor shooting over 40% at one point in the season. I think a couple guys dipped under that by the end. But that's the kind of shooting they had. And it was just a pick your poison type situation. Also, you mentioned, a shot maker, late shot clock situation, late game situations. They could just put him in screen and roll with Malachi. He knew what to do. He knew how to read the screens, re-screen when he had to, slip them when he had to. And 4th year junior and a 5th year senior doing that with really good footwork and vision, it was lethal for teams. Teams couldn't stop it.
I was going to bring this up towards the end of the conversation, and you outlined this and framed it perfectly there. His athletic IQ, I mean, it's not his pure athletic ability might not blow you away like if you're going to compare him to, fairly or unfairly to a Brandon Clark or a Zion Williamson, but his athletic IQ was stood off and jumped off the screen at you, especially when they put that pick and roll. And like you mentioned with Malachi, people had to pick their poison for sure. One of the reasons for your amazing season, it has to be Coach Dutcher and the coaching staff. He slid right down the bench after Coach Fisher coaching career found the finish line. He won the auto bid and defeated Nevada with their big season. And then this year, he just blew the doors off of college basketball with a really historic season. His transition down the bench is as smooth as a fresh jar of Skippy peanut butter. What are some of the characteristics that help define Coach Dutcher's sideline success in the head coach chair?
Well, I mean, he's a son of a head coach. His dad, Jim Dutcher, was coached at Minnesota. In fact, was the last Minnesota coach to win a Big Ten title that wasn't stripped. They won one since, but they had since been vacated back in the 80s. And so he grew up the son of a coach. You know, he was a manager. He went to Minnesota when his dad was coaching there. He was a manager. He was in the locker rooms. He was in film sessions. He was at practices. I mean, he's been bred for this job with Coach Fisher and Coach Frieder at Michigan, and then just Coach Fisher, and then came with Coach Fisher with San Diego State. He's been through this and was kind of waiting his turn, you know, became a head coach just before his turned 57. You know, the thing that changed that I thought was different for him this year wasn't that he all of a sudden learned how to coach, you know, over the summer. It was that, you know, last year he had 5 freshmen. Anyone will tell you, if you have freshmen, it is hard, and particularly in this era of basketball. And, you know, a couple things happened. He played in the conference where Nevada started a lineup of 5 fifth-year seniors. It was, you know, the stat was they were older than the Phoenix Suns starting lineup. They won. They dominated the league. And then he went to the Final Four in Minneapolis in his hometown, and he saw Chris Beard in Texas Tech and what he did with grad transfers and a JUCO transfer. And that just kind of cemented for him that we got to get older, and that's the way to go. And so he did. He had Malachi Flynn waiting. He got KJ Fagan. He got Yanni Wetzel. He got Trey Pulliam, JUCO, who's a 4th-year junior JUCO guard from out of Texas. He had Matt Mitchell and Jordan Shackle coming back. He had another 5th-year senior, Nolan Lorraine, big man on the bench. So he got really, really old. And what did that allow him to do? It wasn't that he was a better coach. It was that he was able to coach. And they run a lot of read stuff, a lot of offenses reads. The defense is really sophisticated. It's always been. It takes guys a couple of years to kind of learn their principles. They have, you know, 6 or 7 different ways of guarding ball screens. But they were so sophisticated this year. And he's such a higher level. He's a really intelligent guy. He can see things. He's the one guy who, when he does a scout, he doesn't bring notes with him. He watches 4 or 5 films, and he knows every play in his head. And he just has that kind of almost idiot savant type brain with basketball. And so he could see things on the floor, and his coaching staff is very veteran too, and they would see things. And now that he has veterans, they would tell them in such a way that they could make adjustments. And I'll give you an example. They were doing such high level stuff as they would say, okay, we're going to switch all ball screens. We're going to switch the 1-4 ball screen, but not the 1-5 ball screen, except with this point guard, we'll go under the 1-5 ball screen. But when they put the backup in, we're going to go over the top and hedge it. And they play it differently depending on personnel and position. And they would change it at timeout sometimes or at halftime. And it was just because he had a veteran team that could absorb it. You talk about athletic IQ. They had a bunch of guys like that. And they could absorb that. So his coaching, I think, was limited last year with all the freshmen. And this year you really got to see what he has and his ability to coach. The second thing is he's been preaching this since day one. I want guys to play the right way. I know it's a coaching cliche, but he wanted an unselfish team. And it took him 3 years to build that in his image. And he had an incredibly unselfish team. And San Diego State's not known as an assist team. Their assist to basket ratio was ridiculously high for the way they play. And he loves shooters. And so he kind of built an offensive team in his image. And it took him a few years, but he achieved it finally.
It sounds like the next question I was going to go to was the team culture and characteristics. And you definitely highlighted a few of those. We mentioned, their pace of play, but the metrics profile parallels that of last year's champion UVA as far as pace of play and efficiency numbers. Can you explain to the listeners some of the baseline principles that yield such positive results for the Aztecs for the past few seasons? I mean, even with the freshman when he was trying to coach hard, and with Coach Fisher for the last 2 decades, for that matter.
A couple things. They've always, Coach Fisher was always a defensive guy. I mean, 65, 70% of their practices are defense. Scout defense, guarding the scout team, or just basic defensive drills. I mean, no magic bullet, just, we're going to get down in the stance and play help side defense, whether it's a 4-on-4 shell drill, whether it's just 2-on-2 breakdowns. They do it over and over and over. I mean, definitely, I know kids don't like to play defense, but they get kids to buy into that. And, you look at their tempo numbers, and it's really kind of deceiving because they always fashion themselves, we like to get out and run. And players, whenever they commit to San Diego State, they go, I committed there because they get out and run. And they do. But the thing is, they play defense so well that their opponents, if you look at the average length of opponent's possession in seconds, it's so long, so much longer than everybody else because they just can't find holes or gaps, probe the defense. They just can't get anywhere. And so they get in these late shot clock situations all the time. I mean, the start of every game, teams have a shot clock violation or just jacking up threes at the buzzer. And you just see it over and over and over again. And that's the culture of defense. The other thing too, when you mentioned culture and the baseline principles and bedrock of the program, and it goes back to Kawhi, is work ethic. Kawhi, everyone knows he has this legendary work ethic, and it kind of started passed down to the generations. Jamal Franklin was next. He saw it. He was close friends with Kawhi, and he kind of continued that. And then Xavier Thames and J.J. O'Brien came, and you just started to see this. It was, I hate to use the analogy of a virus and infectious and contagious in those words, and I don't mean them insensitively at this time, but that's kind of how it's been with this team. It started with Kawhi, and then there was like one or two guys, and there was maybe four. Well, now it's the entire team. An example was this year they played at Wyoming. This is the hardest road trip. They actually was one of their few charters they took all year. They usually don't charter. And they chartered into Laramie, played the game, chartered back, got home like at 1 a.m. And at 8 a.m. the next morning, the entire team, all healthy scholarship players, were in the gym doing individual workouts on their own in the Jam Center practice facility. The morning after, getting home at 1 a.m., playing a game. And that's how they were all season. And they are all grinders. They're all gym rats. And that is something that has kind of separated them. And other coaches have noticed that and tried to point that out to their teams and said, look, this is why they're good. They don't wow you with their athleticism. Yeah, they have some good shooters and some good players, but it's their work ethic, that their buy-in that has separated them. And that's something that, it's hard for the people on the outside to see because they assume everybody works the same. But it's hard for me to imagine a team that works harder or longer than these guys do.
I think you mentioned the characteristic there. There's just some old-fashioned grit that's involved in that culture. And if you're going to get up at 8 a.m., go to practice, do your individual drills, then probably go to class later on that day, and then try, and I'm sure they're going to hit the weight room later on that day. It just seemed like the schedules.
Absolutely.
It seemed like that was just ingrained, and it wasn't a decision to be made. It's just what gets done every day as a San Diego State Aztec. Hey, we'd be remiss if we didn't play fortune teller here, Mark. Did San Diego State own the proper recipe to make another deep run in March, a Final Four run, win the whole dang thing? If you're going to look into your crystal ball, play guessing game, forecast, after coming off a loss in the conference finals, what do you think the mindset of your squad would be heading into March as a number 2 seed and at the very worst, a number 3 seed?
That's a really good question. And I think that was part of the reason it's been painful for a lot of fans, is because I think with them, as much as any team in the country, there was huge unknowns. It wasn't, I think, a Kansas where you could maybe write them into the Elite Eight or a few other teams that, you said, okay, these guys are pretty good. They're going to get this far, or Gonzaga, maybe with another team. They were a team that, okay, they would win their first game. They were going to be coming off a 13-day layoff because they had their conference tournament a week earlier this year. Mountain West had to move it up a week because of a conflict with a huge contractors convention in Vegas. And actually, it was a fortunate thing because they actually got their conference tournament in. But a 13-day layoff, which is almost unprecedented for a team, for a 2 seed to have. So they're going to be a little rusty in that first game against the 15 seed. But, okay, they don't win it by 25. Maybe they win it by 18 or 12, but they win it. To me, the big game for this team was going to be that second game. They're going to play probably a 7 seed, a 7 or 10 seed, probably a power conference team, a team that's big, athletic, has been through the basketball wars, maybe a Big Ten team or a ACC team, just played a ton of really tough games. And that was, to me, going to be the litmus test. Can they get through that game? Now, they've beaten teams of that caliber, no doubt. They blew out Creighton by 31. They handled Iowa. They won at BYU. They won at Utah State. So they definitely have the pedigree to do it. But the thing was, when they lost Nathan Mensah, they just don't have another big. They don't have a rim protector. If Yanni Wetzel gets in foul trouble, they don't have a lot there. They got really small really quick. And so that was going to be the question. Nathan Mensah, now all this going on in the background, Nathan Mensah, pulmonary embolism, typically it's 3 months of anticoagulants, and you can't play on anticoagulants because of the internal bleeding and bruising potential from contact. So he was due to come off those probably this week, either right before the Sweet 16 or right before the Final Four. They were trying, his doctors are trying to move it up a week, and there was a chance they were going to get him for that first weekend. If they got him, it's a different story. And they got him for the Sweet 16. He comes in, he gives them 8-10 minutes a game, big guy, walls up in defense. Now they're a different team. So there are just so many variables. I mean, I think they would have gotten to the Sweet 16, and then it's all matchups. Were they good enough to go to the Final Four? 100%. But you know what? So were 25 other teams this year. And so it's hard to say, well, they were one of 3 teams or one of 6 teams that, had a real chance to win it all. I think there were 25 teams that had a chance to win it all this year. So it's hard to say they were the ones. But do they have the ingredients? 100%. They had a good big. They had a lot of guards. They had a lot of experience. They had a lot of shooting. They have a really good coach. And they have they were in good spots. They would be in Sacramento the first weekend, in LA, which would be completely red and black for them for the second weekend. So they had a lot of things going their way. But at the same time, again, coming off that loss, did they get past that second game? I don't know. It would have been interesting to see.
Yeah, it just goes back to the same part of the conversation that we hit on earlier, just the opportunity that all of the student athletes, all the programs that were robbed of that, just plain old opportunity. And you just wanted to see what would happen. And that's why, this sport is the best sport in the nation. Is you never know what's going to happen with that opportunity with student athletes having to make, late game decisions that they've been coached on all season, but you just want to see how it would play out. And I mean, speaking of your home court, you mentioned that would be red and black, if they were out west. You have one of the most unique places in sports. The show is definitely a thing. So what we're going to ask you to do, Mark, is kind of tough here, but we're going to ask you to put into words the home game at Viejas is like for the listeners, especially those out here on the East Coast that just might not get it or might not stay up late to see what happens there. Brag about your home court a little bit here.
Okay, so the thing that's different about San Diego State than a lot of other places, it's in a city. So you see a lot of these great home courts in Lawrence, Kansas. Even at Duke is a small arena, or Gonzaga. Even Arizona, Tucson, Arizona, not a big place. But here's a big city that has no team that win, and here's the team that wins that goes 34-3 in 2010-11. It goes to 6 straight NCAA tournaments and 11 straight NCAA NITs. It's sold out in July or August. I mean, they sell the thing out. In these last couple of years, it hasn't, but it's back to that. Student tickets completely sold out. 2,500 student tickets because it's a 35,000 enrollment university. It was interesting is, everyone kind of assumes the show is and the student section is the best in the country. Well, the last few years, it's been, by their own admission, awful. I mean, they've been down to like 400 or 500 students a game because they weren't winning, and students were spoiled and they weren't coming. And this year it changed because they won and they got good. And once the students kind of got into it, it kind of feeds on itself because, when a student comes and no one's there, they say, oh, this is dead. I don't want to come. And when they're winning and, more students come, wow, it's really fun. And then everyone wants it. It's not a student section of 500, a student section of 2,500. It's in the end behind the basket right next to the visitors bench. And all they do is they're on the visitor bench over and just constantly the whole game. It's an arena that doesn't have levels. It goes straight up 30 something rows and it's steep. I mean, walking those stairs, it feels like you're at altitude. It is hard even for someone in shape, but because it's straight up and down. So you can imagine the noise. It's built into a pit into the ground and the noise just comes down. It's definitely one of the louder places I've ever been in. Maybe the Marriott Center when it's full at BYU is louder. It's just intimidating. It has this aura about it, and opposing teams really struggle with it. Yeah, when it's going, and it was definitely going this season, and it probably will be again next year.
Yeah, we hope so. That sounds about right. And I hope, listeners, you made your movie in your mind through Mark's words there. He did an unbelievable job of trying to paint the picture of what it would look like. And when you're describing the depth and just this pure verticality, and you mentioned how the sound just gets retained in that arena. It reminded me of I'm a big Seahawk fan, and the Seahawks home field where like the noise just kind of stays. It doesn't have any place to escape.
Yeah.
So that any heckle or any cat call is going to be heard and then just kind of retained in that arena. And it's an amazing venue and one of the best places in college basketball, no doubt. Some of the teams that came to Viejas had some NBA-ish players on it. You want to put on your NBA scouting hat for a few minutes here? Give us an NBA Out on maybe Nevada's Jalen Harris, Boise State's Derek Alston, and maybe Utah State's Sam Merrill. What do you see with any of those three players as far as playing at the next level?
I'll start with Sam Merrill. He was the Mount West Player of the Year last year. He's one of my favorite players in the league just because he's such a great guy. You know, he's older. He's been on a Mormon mission. He's mature. He wasn't the same player this year until pretty much until the championship or maybe the Mountain West tournament. He had a great tournament. He was hurt. Something was wrong with him. He's such a prideful guy, and he doesn't like to make excuses. He would never say. He made a couple references. I asked him point blank after the game at Utah State. He smiled at me and said, you know, everyone's buffed up and bruised, you know, in basketball. But he had something wrong with him. He wasn't fit. Yeah, I'm sure he probably barely practiced this year. So he wasn't, and he still had great numbers, wasn't the same player. But a real smart guy. He can handle the ball. He is a elite passer. I think that's what people, they look at his scoring numbers and don't realize how good a passer he is. That's why San Diego State did not double team him late in the game of the conference final when he hit a unbelievable fall away 27-footer over who I thought should have been the defensive player of the year, KJ Fagan, all over him, probably even fouled him. Made it. He didn't run another set defender at him because he's such an elite passer. He would just picked out the open man. It would have been a layup. He's good with the ball. He can shoot it. We'll see if he's athletically good enough on defense to play in the NBA. But, you know, he guarded Malachi Flynn, and Malachi Flynn did not have a great game against him, and he guarded him for most of the game. So, and he played 40 minutes. So he's a warrior. I think he's going to have a shot. You know, Derek Alston's interesting. I think he's going to probably come out. His dad is the coach of the Westchester Knicks. So if worst comes to worst and he doesn't make an NBA roster, doesn't get drafted, guess where he'll end up, you know, with his dad coaching him. They've had a couple players like this where they brought him in skinny, under the radar guys. James Webb was one, and then Chandler Hutchinson was the more notable one that ended up getting drafted first round by the Bulls. They just bring them along slowly and add something to their game every year, whether it's a three-point shot, whether it's a drive, whether it's ball handling. He still sort of reads thin, and he kind of floats in and out of games. He has some good games. He has some bad games. He's a little bit inconsistent, but the potential is there. The athleticism is there. I think he needs another year in college. I think that about a lot of players, but I have a feeling we'll see him coming out. And you probably won't hear much about him because he'll be in the G League for 3 or 4 years. And then I think he'll have a shot because he's so long. He's 6'10" and long and shoot and handle it, that he'll have a shot at an NBA roster in a few years. And then Jalen Harris is interesting. He's not a great defender, but boy, he can shoot it. He can score it. He got rolling this year, had a bunch of 30-point games, and had a real good game in the game that, you know, kind of got overshadowed, that Malachi Flynn had 36 against them in the regular season finale at their place. Had a bunch of points in the first half and cooled off in the second half. But he gets a little frustrated. I don't want to call him selfish, but, you know, you can tell he starts hunting his shot if he doesn't get the ball enough. I suspect he'll come back. They'll have a real good backcourt next year with Desmond Cambridge, transferred from Brown. You know, he's got a little bit more size than a Malachi Flynn, but he'll be an interesting prospect because he can shoot it, he can score it, and there are a lot of guys like that. So we'll see if he can sort of separate himself, you know, with another year in college.
Yeah, I can see him coming back as well, and I understand what you're saying about with Alston. Alston was one of those guys that just fits the NBA profile visually with his length and his skill set. Totally get you on that. Thank you for the scouting report. I hope some NBA minds were listening to that. Let's get you out here on 3 quick ones. Let's go 3 T's. Tastes. Help the listeners out. What's one of the best craft beers or breweries out there in San Diego?
I'll say Ballast Point. They have a beer called Sculpin that they put out different flavors. And there's a basic called Sculpin that's very good. It's an IPA. But the pineapple Sculpin is one of the most unique craft beers that I've ever tasted. And it's not for everybody because some people just can't get past the pineapple part. But the aroma, it just instantly transports you to like Kauai on a beach. I mean, it's just got this island feel to it. It fits the San Diego culture. It's not a super heavy IPA, but it is an IPA, and it's a beer to be savored. And Ballast Point's done an unbelievable job with it, so I go with that.
I agree with your Ballast Point. I kind of am partial to the grapefruit one if we're talking Ballast Point.
I like the grapefruit one too.
Okay, there we go. All right, trusts. Who's one player in the nation from this past season who you would trust with the last second possession with the game on the line?
Oof, well, I'm going to go a local and a guy from my side of the country and a guy from your side of the country. I'm going to go with Miles Powell. I just love his demeanor. You know, I don't know what his analytics are with the ball in his hand late, but I just kind of have, you know, as a coach, and you just got to go with your gut. I just like his grit and his determination, and I want to put the ball in his hands. And out here, I just think there's no doubt it's Malachi Flynn. He can create a shot. He can get to the rim. He can create for others. He can come off a ball screen, and he's got that, like I talked about, that quiet, facet demeanor to him. You know, if you're a defender, you're just like, oh boy, I don't want to face this.
Defenders out here on the East Coast feel the exact same way about Powell. I mean, that you talk about like some moxie. That guy plays a little bit of moxie, and he is fearless. He does not care who's in the other side and in the other uniform. He doesn't give a damn. He will try to score on you. He is absolutely ruthless. So great call with Powell. And then Tunes. Mark, what have you been listening to podcast or music-wise while you're longing for sports to return here? Give a couple recommendations.
It might surprise people because maybe one. I'm a big Fish, so I listen to a lot of Fish. You know, they get to San Diego like every 2 years. I've seen them in San Francisco. I'll try to go see them somewhere else. I've been doing a kind of a dinner and a show type thing right now where they're doing a free webcast of one of their old shows, and one of the band members puts up a recipe, whether it's for chili or something else. And so your idea is you're supposed to make the recipe and then watch their show. Comes on at 8:30 Eastern, so 5:30, a little bit early, but they're all on YouTube now. So, but I'm a big Fish guy. I just like the variety. I like the jams. I like the vibe. Like the community. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Perfect. I know I have a couple coworkers that would definitely agree with you as far as being a Fish fan and what they provide for their listenership. Mark, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for jumping on the Screen to Screener College Basketball Podcast to help with our season recap series, chat some Aztecs and some in-conference. I hope you and the crew out there stay healthy, strong, and calm. And cheers. Cilantro, grazie. Thank you so much, Mark.
All right. Well, enjoy a grapefruit sculpin in your honor.
Cheers. That sounds lovely. I can't wait. Thanks, Mark.
All right. We'll talk to you guys.
I'm addicted to the appetite.